Welcome, everyone. My name is Casey Given. I am the president and executive director of Young Voices, and this is our second Next Gen debate. Thanks for coming out tonight. So just to tell you a little bit about Young Voices, we are a nonprofit talent agency for libertarian, conservative, classical liberal writers and commentators. If that sounds like you, if you're interested in kind of jumpstarting your career in policy, journalism, and academia, talk to me at the reception. I got a bunch of propaganda over there, our annual reports, pamphlets, all that good stuff. Our next round for applications closes in November 30th. If you are interested in learning more about writing, commentary, all that good stuff, check us out. We started this series this month to kind of inspire more conversations, especially about interesting, hot-pressing topics of the day. It's been a great success. I'm sure some of you were out for our first very wild and spicy debate just 2 weeks ago on the future of the American Communist Party. We'll see if tonight is as spicy. Hopefully not, but it'll be a good time nonetheless. So before we get started and I turn it over to our moderator, I want to introduce for a quick announcement, actually the man who inspired the whole kind of for us to start a debate organization, and that is Gene Epstein from the Soho Forum.
Thank you, Casey. I'm so proud of these guys. They've been running wild and crazy debates. I attended the last one. My mommy was a commie. I have her FBI file to prove it. So for me, it was a sort of a return to my youth to listen to communism get defended at this previous debate. It was a crazy shit show, but incredibly entertaining. And I imagine tonight it will be similarly a crazy shit show, but really entertaining, and that's what matters the most. At the Soho Forum, we do it slightly differently, not quite the shit show, maybe not quite as entertaining, but interesting, hopefully. November 20th, we're going to have a one-on-one debate. We always do one-on-one, as these guys do, a one-on-one debate between two Argentinians. Imagine that. And they are going to be debating the merits and demerits of the Libertarian president of Argentina, Javier Milei. So that should be a fun evening. December 11th, we're going to have a debate on presidential immunity, and we're going to feature Glenn Greenwald. And there I really do urge you to buy tickets since he's a big draw. If you just go into Soho Forum, thesohoforum.org, you'll find the tickets are available. And if you grab Heckmit, you'll be able to find my email address on the back. And if you write me at that email address, he can give you a card. I'll give you a free ticket. Register as a student, it's only $10. So I hope to see you then. And unfortunately, I've got another engagement uptown, and we'll miss this debate, but I'll see the video afterwards. I think you're in for a great evening. And thanks for your attention. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Gene. Really the grandfather of libertarian debates in New York, so really appreciate that. And I want to give another thanks to our partners at Civil. Civil is a new streaming platform kind of showcasing lots of free speech, open dialogue type creators and thought leaders. Completely free. Encourage you to check them out. They are broadcasting this debate live on their platform as well as X. So thanks for those of you tuning in. We will be featuring questions from folks when we get to the Q&A, not just in the room, but also maybe one or two folks from the live stream as well. So yeah, we'll have details about how to add those questions there too on the platform. And yeah, just one housekeeping note, since it is being recorded, if you ask a question, you will be on camera. But other than that, we will be having a fun evening. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the guy who came to me to start with the idea after Gene, coming from Gene, to start this debate club, and that is the director of Next Gen Debates, Hekmat Aboukader.
Thank you, Casey. And again, thank you very much, Gene, for inspiring this debate society. I found myself sitting in the Soho Forum debates and realizing that most of the people debating are above 60. So we want to bring new blood in, bring these people in, young voices, as our sponsors, the same name. We want to bring them in and have them debate topics that pertain to you folks, mainly all of you folks who are under 35 from my estimate. Topics about the draft. Are we going to be sent to go fight in foreign wars? Are we going to have any of our social security? Are we going to be having to use pronouns we don't want to use? Such topics that pertain to us that we have little voice in them. We're going to try and reorient the conversation, bring those folks in, and take over control of the conversation, if only for one night, once a month. So thank you all for coming here. And regarding this specific debate, I want to quickly explain what the process looks like. So it's an Oxford-style debate. So the debaters will have an intro, a rebuttal, and then question time from each other from each debater to one another, then from the moderator, and then finally from you folks. You'll have this mic over there. You'll get to ask both debaters questions about the topic discussed, and then at the end, they will do a 5-minute closing. We start the debate with a quick vote where you show us where you stand on the topic. So with that, let me move to this slide here. Please go ahead and use your phones, your cameras, the cameras on your phones, to scan this QR code and register your vote about the topic at hand, which is, as you can see here, in the November 2024 presidential election, Libertarians should vote for Kamala Harris. This is a topic we're engaging in today, and we want your voice to be counted. So please go ahead, vote yes, no, agree, disagree, or undecided. And as you do so, I will go ahead and introduce the topic and introduce the two debaters. The QR code will still be here, just slightly smaller. The topic at hand, I feel very personally connected to, because exactly 10 years ago, my family and I, we moved from Syria to the United States, and my parents are actually, they just turned citizens, and they can finally vote in an American election. So this is very exciting stuff for them, and I want them to, hopefully watching, to have an idea of who they should be voting for this election. So thank you for engaging in this little tutorial for my parents. Appreciate it. All right, with that said, please allow me to introduce Sean Fitzgerald, or also known as Actual Justice Warrior. Please, Sean. Sean is a famous influencer online. He just reached 400,000 followers, subscribers on YouTube on his channel. Congratulations, Sean. He will be taking the opposition, so he would be attacking the motion that Libertarians should vote for Kamala Harris. For the defense of the motion for the proposition, we have Joshua Eakle. Please, Joshua, come join us. Please. Joshua is the head of Project Liberal, and they reach 100 million people with their videos and content annually. So thank you both for joining us for this debate. Really, really appreciate it. So, folks, at this point, we're going to close the voting and open it up for the opening statements. I hope you had ample time to vote, and just keep that in mind. You're going to have to do it once more to see the winner of the debate, which will be decided by the person that sways more people to their side at the end of the debate. So the person who gets more of a change in the conclusion. All right, with that, let us commence. Sean, you have 10 minutes for your opening statement.
So today's proposition, to me, is honestly a little bit ridiculous. Because if you were to construct a candidate out of nothing, and the sole premise of that candidate...
Sorry, take the mic.
Oh, okay. Okay. Can everybody hear me better now? Yes. The technical difficulties aren't my fault, but they're not his fault either. So everybody give him a nice hand for giving me this microphone. Okay, so one of the reasons why I agreed to this particular debate is because the premise, I find it to be absolutely amazing. Because if you were to construct a candidate out of nothing to be the opposite of a libertarian, that would be Vice President Kamala Harris. This woman manages to fail in every single category in terms of libertarianism. So I recently watched a John Stossel segment from way back when all the Democrats were running for president back in 2019, and he ranked all of those candidates in terms of how much they would add to annual spending. Now, remember, this is a race that had self-professed socialist Bernie Sanders in there, and he added a ton of money to the deficit. It was $3.9 trillion for Bernie Sanders policies. Elizabeth Warren, who should have been in second because she was the closest to a socialist behind Bernie Sanders, $3.8 trillion. For context, Biden's proposals, $287 billion, Trump $267 billion. So not great from either of those candidates. Kamala Harris, our champion of the day, $4.1 trillion and much closer to $4.2 trillion. So in terms of government spending, when she was running for president, she was the worst on this issue. And again, that's not over 10 years. A lot of times you hear that over 10 years. That was over 1 year. 1 year of her budget would have added $4.1 trillion to the deficit. To the federal budget. In addition to that, Kamala Harris is a chameleon. So right now she'll talk about criminal justice reform, or maybe she's reverted back to being a prosecutor, but we need to actually examine her record. In 2009, the California Supreme Court ended up ruling that California prisons were overpopulated. This was an edict by the Supreme Court. Kamala Harris, Attorney General, she was tasked with the task of actually enforcing that, letting out these nonviolent offenders in order to reduce prison population, in order to be compliant with the Supreme Court of her state's order. Now, my opponent is probably going to argue the evil orange man's threat to democracy and threat to institutions. But did you know that Kamala Harris was nearly held in contempt of court because of 2 years of her finding every which way around releasing these nonviolent offenders? Again, these motions were described by Believe Politico, but I could be wrong on that, as deliberately obstructive. And this was all to keep people in prison. One of the arguments that she put forward for why we needed those people in prison is because it would hurt California's economy, it would hurt their efforts to fight wildfires, because they were actually using the prison labor as cheap labor to fight wildfires. Again, people who are nonviolent criminals forced into the most dangerous situations. Again, this is the Libertarian candidate that we're supposed to vote for. On top of that, let's talk about appeal and interest in libertarians. So the evil orange man, not the most libertarian candidate. I understand that. But you know what he did? He actually went to the Libertarian Party convention. And the reason he did that was to ask for people's votes, because he believed that if you want somebody to vote for you, it is incumbent on you to convince them. Well, Kamala Harris's VP, which we will get into in a little bit in this opening statement, he decided to say on The Daily Show to Jon Stewart, when being questioned about accepting support from Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney, that the support of Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney are important because those are the kind of people that give libertarians permission to vote for Kamala Harris. Because according to them, the libertarians are being guided by Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney. Ridiculous. But again, that's on video, and that's as recent as this week. Now, in terms of economic policies, look, Trump, again, he's not the only candidate in the race. You could vote Libertarian. You could vote for Oliver. Chase Oliver, thank you. You could vote for Jill Stein, too. You could vote for Chase Oliver, and from a libertarian perspective, his platform seems like it's the most appealing. He has things about repealing the FISA Act, which again allows the government to spy on you under the premise that you're talking to somebody overseas. He also has way better spending proposals than any of these candidates, but that's to be expected for a libertarian candidate. But again, Kamala Harris, which I don't even have to prove, is the worst in every regard. So one of her big things that she's been pushing is this idea that she's going to help Americans buy housing, because we all know what we need in order to incentivize housing in the United States of America to become more affordable is a San Francisco Democrat. I mean, everybody understands this. So her big policy in terms of housing, it goes in 3 phases. So first, she's going to stimulate demand. She's going to give you $25,000 in a credit to help you buy a home. So that way we boost demand, because we all know that when you have a fixed supply and then you artificially boost demand, prices come down, according to Kamala Harris. But in addition to that, she also has promised that she's going to work with builders in order to build 3 million homes across 4 years which is her first term as president. Now, that sounds pretty good. It sounds pretty impressive. But again, this rings very hollow as something that will reduce the price of housing, because these are the policies that they try in the state of California. They give people down payment assistance to artificially boost demand, and then they promise that the government will manage with these private companies in order to build the houses that will somehow increase supply. And the funny thing is about that 3 million house promise in her first 4 years is that right now, today, when we have a shortage of homes, guess what? We build 4 million a year. So there is no more better San Francisco policy other than we're going to gin up demand, which will raise prices, and then cut the amount of homes that are being built by 25%, and then call that a success. So again, absolute worst candidate. If prices are high, you don't need to incentivize builders in order to build. What you need to do is move out the regulations that are preventing them from being able to build. That's just my opinion, but again, he's tasked with making the libertarian case that that policy will somehow work. In terms of civil liberties, we already covered forcibly keeping people in prison in defiance of the California Supreme Court in order to force them to fight wildfires in the state of California, which is incredibly dangerous. But in addition to that, the Harris and Walz administration is going to be absolutely awful on free speech. So right now, we're dealing with the Biden administration, which is inclined to prosecute his political opponents. In Nashville in 2020, there was an abortion protest. Now, this took place in the hallway of an office building. Now, these protesters, let's be clear about this, they were arrested for trespassing, as they should have been, because when you're on private property and you're told that you need to leave and you don't leave, guess what? You get arrested for trespassing. We all understand that. But the Biden DOJ decided to take it one step further. They decided that they were not only going to charge them under the FACE Act, but in addition to that, they decided to charge them with denying people a constitutional liberty. So this ended up resulting in a simple trespassing charge being upgraded to felony charges, and now a group of individuals, most of which who are in their 70s, are facing multiple years in prison for a peaceful protest under the premise that they were blocking abortion access. And I invite anybody to watch the video because they weren't blocking the entrance to the place. Now, Harris has said that she would not change anything from the Biden administration. So to me, it is unlikely that she is going to pardon these people or reverse this, but if Trump is elected, that is likely the course of action that he will take. So in terms of First Amendment protections, Trump talks a lot about how he doesn't like flag burning or whatever thing that's bothering him during the day, Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, whatever this guy is tweeting about at 3 a.m, but I judge somebody based on actions. This did not happen during the Trump administration, but it happened during the Biden-Harris administration. And in addition to that, Tim Walz has said repeatedly, both in the debate stage and prior to being the VP nominee, that the First Amendment doesn't protect your right to misinformation or hate speech. These people are authoritarians. They're going to crack down on your First Amendment. In addition to that, we have the Second Amendment. And my favorite line from the libertarian hopeful Kamala Harris is that she is in favor of the Second Amendment. She's a gun owner, and she's not going to take away your guns, but she's in favor of an assault weapons ban, which means she's going to take away your guns. But in addition to that, it's actually come out that when she was San Francisco district attorney, she also wanted to come after your handguns. Now, it is incredibly impossible for you to get a handgun in San Francisco at the time that she was the district attorney, but she had one, but she wants to take it away from you. And I could go on and on because the same is true in terms of marijuana. She locked up people for smoking marijuana and then laughed about it on a podcast with Charlemagne the God. This woman is the antithesis of a libertarian. You could literally write in any candidate, living or dead, and you would make more use of your vote for the libertarian cause than Kamala Harris. That's it. Opening statement done.
Testing. 1, 2, 3. Good? Yeah. Good? Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you to Young Voices, Hegbat. Thank you, Casey. Appreciate it for the offering this to put this on and having me here. This is a very important conversation. So my name is Josh Eakle. I'm a classically liberal organizer. I've spent over a decade in the libertarian movement. I have never in my life voted for a Democrat for president. Ever since I was 18, I voted Libertarian third party. This year, I'm not going to do that, and I want to tell you why. So obviously, the resolution is a simple question. Should we vote as Libertarians for Kamala Harris? And we know the Libertarian voting bloc has historically been a very important voting bloc, where 1% to 3% of the electorate, we can sway the election one way or the other. I'm going to argue that we should vote for Kamala Harris for 4 reasons. So the first reason is that Trump violated his oath to the Constitution, and electing him again would put all of our natural rights in jeopardy. I'm going to argue that Trump failed to deliver a libertarian agenda during his first term and actually pulled the GOP farther away from our values during his first term than we've seen in at least my lifetime. Third, he has an authoritarian agenda for his third term that is radically worse than the first. And fourth, I believe Kamala Harris legitimately is the best strategic vote to ensure the viability of our ideas in the future. So let me just start with the oath. We understand as libertarians that our natural rights are inherent, but there has been no better guarantor of our natural rights than the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Trump has not just called to terminate the Constitution. January 6th proved that he was willing to actually try and do that. I believe that his actions on January 6th do disqualify him from ever serving again. Leading up to the election, Trump's team said he planned to declare victory regardless of the election results on that night. After losing, sure enough, he declared victory without evidence, pressured officials across the country to overturn the results, lost 62 fraud cases, many of which thrown out by judges he appointed. He organized a criminal scheme to replace legitimate electors with fake electors, and then incited a riot to pressure Mike Pence into accepting those electors, those fake electors, on January 6th. And Pence confirmed on that day that Trump asked him to put himself over the Constitution. And Pence himself, his vice president, said that he should never be president again. So to this day, Trump has refused to concede. He's called to terminate the Constitution. He's pledged to pardon the Capitol rioters. And he's put J.D. Vance in his administration, somebody who's promised to do what Mike Pence wouldn't do. And it proves to me, January 6th, that Trump puts his personal pursuit of power above every other limitation. And as I said, the Constitution is the best guarantor of our natural rights. If we allow a president to unilaterally overturn it, all the other natural rights protected by are at jeopardy. The democratic process and the ability to choose our leaders is our #1 biggest stopgap towards tyranny. And there's a reason throughout history that authoritarians attack our electoral system first, and Trump is not an exception to that. So related to his first term wasn't a rejection of libertarian values, and it pulled the GOP farther away from our values than I've seen in my lifetime. He mainstreamed protectionism in the GOP. He started trade wars around the world. He added billions in new tariffs. He was the most fiscally reckless president in American history. Even if you take out COVID spending, Trump exceeded in one term the entire federal budget increase overseen by Obama in 2 terms, and he approved twice as much 10-year spending as Biden did in his term. And that's excluding COVID spending, okay? Trump pushed to end the Fed's independence. He oversaw the printing of half the money supply in a single year, directly leading to the inflation that we saw over the last 4 years. It started ticking up 90 days after he left office. He didn't end a single war. He had the military involved in countless conflicts overseas. He killed tens of thousands of civilians with drone strikes, exponentially more than Biden. The majority of his vetoes, I'm not sure if you know this, 5 of his 10 vetoes were on legislation, bipartisan legislation, that limited his war-making powers. He then handed those war-making abilities to the Biden-Kamala administration. He also hid his drone activity from the public and gave the CIA broad powers to carry out drone strikes abroad without oversight. He was a champion of mass surveillance. He renewed FISA 702, attacked libertarians that tried to reform it, and he expanded domestic surveillance operations. He passed more gun control than any president I had seen up until that point. He pushed red flag laws, famously saying he wants to take the guns first and go through due process later. He indicted Assange. He used the Espionage Act to silence whistleblowers. He routinely called the press the enemy of the people. He left office with a 20% increase in violent crime. He encouraged governors to dominate protesters. He praised law enforcement when they used excessive force. He embraced the drug war. He weaponized the federal government against states that legalized cannabis. He called for the death penalty for drug dealers. He rejected freedom of movement. He forced the American taxpayer to pay $15 billion for an ineffective wall and pushed inhumane treatment of migrants at the border. He oversaw the largest wealth transfer in human history, from small businesses to multinational corporations with the COVID lockdowns. He attacked governors who tried to reopen their states. He called to throw Thomas Massie out of the Republican Party because he requested a recorded vote on the first COVID stimulus bill. He never fired Fauci. He gave him a presidential commendation. So sure, Trump cut taxes. But if you look at his record in totality, specifically the mainstreaming of anti-libertarian positions on immigration, on spending, on trade. Trump's first term only pulled the GOP farther away from our values. So looking forward, Trump's promising an authoritarian agenda for his next term. He's promised to use the Alien and Sedition Acts to deploy the military to round up and deport millions of peaceful immigrants. He's promised to invoke wartime powers that give him the power to arrest and detain even American citizens without trial. This is the most authoritarian proposal that Americans have seen since Japanese internment. It would require widespread racial profiling, countless Fourth Amendment violations. It would be an economic disaster. It would immediately send us into a recession. Kamala has she's proposed to reform our broken immigration system and give people an earned pathway to citizenship. Trump has promised to make his first term spending like nothing. Assuming he doesn't deport 11 million people, his spending proposals would increase the deficit by $5.8 trillion over 10 years. Sean mentioned Kamala's spending proposals from 2020. Her spending proposals this year are 5 times less than that when you look at her actual budget proposal. Trump wants to raise taxes on everyone. He doesn't want to cut taxes. He wants to introduce a universal tariff that would cost taxpayers thousands of dollars every year on everything they buy. Kamala's rejected universal tariffs. Trump has endorsed the centrally planned regulatory regime by promising to protect single-family zoning, which is the #1 driver of housing prices. Kamala has promised to deregulate housing and reform single-family zoning, and among other issues. Trump has called for universal qualified immunity for police. He's called to implement a violent day where police are allowed to violently crack down on communities without repercussions. He's called for the expansion of legalized theft through civil forfeiture. He's called for a nationwide stop and frisk. Trump supports ending, or Kamala, I should say, supports ending qualified immunity and comprehensive police reform. Trump is not a free speech candidate. He's called for the prosecution of Google. He wants to go after Google for showing search results he dislikes. He's called to repeal Section 230, which is the rule that makes social media companies functional. He's called to pull the broadcast licenses for news organizations that publish things he dislikes. He's called explicitly for price controls. He wants a government to cap credit card rates at 10%. That's 33% lower than Bernie Sanders' proposed price controls. He's called for military tribunals against his political opponents. And let's make note of this. Because of the recent SCOTUS ruling, Trump, who is a convicted felon, will take office with blanket immunity for all official acts he engages in as president. Kamala's pushed to end blanket immunity for presidents. And I'll get into this more. Kamala has moderated. I'll talk about this in my rebuttal from her stances in 2020. But I just want to make a commentary broadly on Kamala Harris. When you look at the trajectories of the two candidates, Kamala Harris, in many ways, is moving away from her far left flank. Trump is embracing it. Kamala is far from a libertarian. She has terrible policy proposals, many of them that Sean will bring up tonight. But she has not violated her oath to the Constitution. She hasn't tried to overturn an election. She is not a narcissist who's promising an authoritarian agenda. She isn't running a campaign centered on revenge. She hasn't promised to put the military in the streets. She isn't demanding the power to put citizens in prison without due process. And a vote for Kamala is not a vote to endorse the Democratic agenda. It's more than that. It's a repudiation of the direction the Republican Party is headed, and it's a vote to keep the door open for future opportunities for our movement. If we have a president with blatant disregard for the Constitution who refuses to accept the results of our elections, we cannot be sure that we, libertarians, will have another opportunity to run a candidate that champions our values in the future. There's a reason virtually all of Trump's former senior administration officials call him a threat to the Constitution. And Republicans are likely to maintain congressional control. They have the Supreme Court. Anything Kamala wants to achieve is going to be difficult without bipartisan support. And there's also no viable third party candidate this year. Not a single minor party candidate is polling above 1%, and no candidate has ballot access in all 50 states. So one of two people is going to win this election. It's going to be Trump or Harris. So libertarians have an unprecedented opportunity this year to keep an authoritarian who tried to overturn the Constitution from getting into power. And if we can use our influence right now, we can send Trumpism to the ash heap of history, open up an opportunity for our movement once again on the right, and then start getting to work on building a future where libertarian ideas can win again. Thank you.
Now, Sean, please, for your rebuttal, 5 minutes.
Is it working? Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? What happened? Oh, all right. Yeah, so I mean, this is essentially what I expected from this. The reason that you have to sacrifice all of your libertarian values and vote for Kamala Harris is because Trump is a great threat. But one of the things that he brought up in his list of grievances against Trump is that even Trump-appointed justices stop the excesses of the Trump administration. And to me, that's absolutely crucial because 2 Supreme Court justices are going to be replaced in the next presidential term, very likely. This is Clarence Thomas and I believe Justice Alito. And crucial decisions on your civil liberties have been decided on partisan lines in terms of the justices, and specifically I'm talking about the Second Amendment decisions. DC versus Heller, McDonald versus Chicago, and the Bruin decision. Kamala Harris, like all the Democrats before her, will appoint justices that will vote to say that the Second Amendment is not an individual right. Who's it a right for in a Bill of Rights that are all individual rights? Who the hell knows? But that's the direction that they're going to go into. In addition to that, he talked about different Trump policies and how he's trending towards authoritarianism. Listen, again, you can vote third party. You can vote libertarian. You can keep your values. That ends up helping the Libertarian Party if that's something that you're interested in. But on top of that, Trump proposed a bunch of crazy things the first time he ran for president, and he didn't actually implement them. So 1,000% tariff or whatever, this is a guy that rambles all the time. I mean, we just have to accept this as reality. You can not like it, you can not vote for him, but this is what he tends to do. But when he did implement tariffs in this country, which were not 1,000% or anything crazy, they ended up passing to the next administration. And a lot of these were done under the guise of national security. And the Biden administration, of which Harris has said that she would not change a thing from, there's nothing that comes to mind that she would do differently, they kept all those tariffs. And in some cases, they actually increased the tariffs. In addition to that, we also got to go to basic economics beyond the tax cuts. Because one of the big promises of Kamala Harris and the Biden administration is that they're going to go after the billionaires, the billionaire tax cheats, and they're going to use that to pay for her lofty agenda, which he underestimates because Kamala Harris hasn't put out all of her policies because she stole the nomination rather recently. But in reality, what they did in terms of economics was not go after the billionaires. They went after you guys. When the American Rescue Plan, which was a completely unnecessary, even by Keynesian standards, stimulus plan that the Biden administration passed early on was tied up, the deciding factor in that tie vote was VP Kamala Harris. Tucked away in that act was that audit of any transaction over $600 if you're working in the sharing economy, which is what people call it, even though it's just the freelance economy. So when they have the chance to get power to go after the millionaires and billionaires in order to pay for their agenda, they don't do that. They go after you. By contrast, Trump has proposed no tax on tips. Kamala stole that proposal because it was so good in terms of politics. But in addition to that, he's also proposed no tax on overtime. So you have one guy that's at least trying to appeal to libertarians, as I said in my open, who appoints justices that have constitutional values, not leftist values, and actually proposes policies to aid the middle class. Now, again, he talked about how, in Kamala's housing plan, and I was hoping he brought this up, they actually have incentives to get rid of local zoning laws. And that's the big crux of how she's going to fix everything. And Trump, by contrast, has said we're going to protect the suburbs. Again, a policy I disagree with. But that doesn't mean that you should pick Kamala over Trump, especially since Joseph R. Biden promised this very same thing, and they had this same conversation leading up to the 2020 election. And did Biden pass this zoning reform? Did he incentivize these local jurisdictions? No, they didn't even bring it up. So I have no expectations that the VP of that administration, who has promised to change nothing from that administration, will actually implement this policy. And by the way, there's no way that the homeowners, because the biggest problem in terms of housing is democracy, because homeowners vote for regulations in order to gin up the value of their property, are going to accept government grants to their government as a substitute for that. That's a local issue that you have to work on locally. And if you're in a state where there's ballot initiatives, like there's one in the New York City ballot if you're a resident here, then vote for those initiatives. But you're not going to have the President of the United States save you in that regard. And by the way, it is wildly inappropriate and not respective of the 10th Amendment for her to even attempt that. So yeah, in every regard, Kamala Harris is worse than the other candidates in terms of libertarian values. The economic tyranny that he talked about with tariffs, those were carried on by the Democrats, and we have no reason to believe that they won't be carried on under her administration.
Yeah, thank you. Ooh. So it is really important to come back to January 6th. There's a couple things I want to talk about on the policy side, but I want to make it very clear to you guys. I do not believe that Kamala Harris is a libertarian. Not by any stretch of the imagination. She's not a libertarian. The reason why I'm supporting Kamala Harris for the first time in my life this year is because I want to make sure that we can have the opportunity in the future to influence the political outcomes in this country. When we watched and read what came out from the DOJ over the last couple of years, or the last couple of weeks, related to January 6th, it shows an absolute blatant disregard for our Constitution and a willingness to stop the peaceful transfer of power. Under J.D. Vance's and Donald Trump's worldview, they have argued that Kamala Harris should have the ability as the vice president to not certify their election if they win this year. They absolutely, willingly, and intentionally worked to overturn and undermine the Constitution. So I say this before I go into the policies because if we cannot have a peaceful transfer of power, we will not be able to kick Kamala out. We won't be able to kick Donald Trump out. We won't be able to kick any candidate out. That is the first thing that underpins everything, everything that makes democracy function. But the GOP has not moderated. It's become far more sycophantic. So Donald Trump can, and he is not mincing words about this, he does intend to introduce a 20% universal tax. He does not want to cut taxes. If you look at Trump's tax cuts and you add on his 20% universal tax proposal, Trump's tax proposal would increase the expenses for Americans at every level except for the top 4% of earners. And it would absolutely harm the economy. It would throw us into recession. It would cause a massive decline in economic output. And this is actually one of the things I wanted to mention related to the spending proposals, that this assumes that Donald Trump does not get his way with mass deportations. If Donald Trump actually comes through with deporting 11 million peaceful immigrants, our GDP in the United States is going to drop 4 to 6%. So that $5.8 trillion number I mentioned in my opening remarks related to Trump's spending proposals, the number that is currently 5 times higher than Kamala's, is assuming consistent GDP growth. If Trump actually delivers on what he's promising, we're going to see immediate recession, and we're going to see economic decline. So here's the situation with this. Sean can attack Kamala Harris for this policy proposal or that policy proposal. Donald Trump has no policy proposals, as Sean even alluded to. He literally flies by the seat of his pants. He uses his Twitter account. There is not a coherent policy proposal on virtually any issue that he's running on. So we have a situation where we have a sycophantic GOP that's been carved out, and many key stakeholders like the chairwoman is his daughter-in-law, many people across the country are the election denialism is the litmus test for whether or not you can be in the Republican Party at this point. We have the sycophantic Republican Party. We have this candidate who's senile, old, unhinged, acts out of impulse, with all these economic and policy proposals that would cause economic devastation to our country. And we want to mince words on whether Kamala has this bad policy or that bad policy. The truth is, we will not, we need to make sure that we defeat Trump to not only ensure that we have a peaceful transfer of power, but we don't go into an immediate economic crisis. And I'm happy to go back and forth in some of the conversation with Sean on some of the specific policy proposals. But yeah, fundamentally, Trump is not only economically dangerous, he's dangerous to our liberties, and he's dangerous to the Constitution. And as a father of 2 young kids, I'm not willing to take a risk on that with someone who has shown significant disdain for the peaceful transfer of power.
All right. Thank you, Josh. All right, folks. At this point, we will invite the two debaters to ask each other questions that they think that the other debater didn't address enough in their opening and rebuttal. Please go ahead. Sean, you can start if you'd like.
Is this good? Okay. I think everybody can hear me at this volume. So, I mean, like, part of your premise is that Trump is so bad that we have to vote for Kamala as the alternative. But again, like, you could vote for a Libertarian candidate. I know they're not going to win the election, but there are benefits to the party in order to advance our goals. It seems kind of weird for me to go out of my way to vote for a candidate who thinks, again, according to our VP, that Dick Cheney gives me permission to vote for her versus somebody who actually tried to appeal to the Libertarians.
Are you voting for the Libertarian candidate?
I'm undecided.
Okay. So we know one of the two candidates is going to win. It's going to be Harris or Trump. I've spent a lot of time organizing within the Libertarian Party for the last 10 years, a lot of time. The Libertarian candidate is not going to win this year. And when we talked about January 6th, when we talked about his actions during his first administration to obstruct the peaceful transfer of power, I think it's a fundamentally risky proposition to give that man another opportunity in the White House at the executive branch. At least in 4 years, we know that we can kick out Kamala Harris, make sure that she is not president again, and have another opportunity. With Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, I don't know if that's the case, and I'm not willing to take that risk. I wanted to ask you a question. One of the things that I hear all the time is Dick Cheney is supporting Kamala Harris. That proves that she's this crazy warmonger. There's some pretty crazy people that are supporting Donald Trump, right? One of the things that I look at, and I'm curious as to how you look at this whole situation, is what kind of coalition could bring apart such ideological diverse individuals like Bernie Sanders, AOC, 200 Republican, former Reagan, former Bush administration officials, Liz Cheney, Dick Cheney, Joe Walsh, former Tea Party congressman. I mean, do you understand or actually recognize what all these very diverse ideological people are saying around Trump's actions on January 6th? Do you feel like Trump violated his oath or Trump acted at least inappropriately on January 6th?
Yeah, I do think that he was inappropriate on January 6th. I don't defend that. People who watch my channel understand that. But in terms of all this group of people that support her, look, Trump has a random grab bag of people, including Robert F. Kennedy, who was born a Democrat, Tulsi Gabbard, who changed to a Republican yesterday, but she was in the progressive Bernie wing of the Democratic Party. My issue isn't with the people that are supporting Kamala Harris, because anybody could support Kamala Harris. You're calling for that right now. My issue is they embrace certain supporters that give me an indication of the direction they want to go in. You talk about Trump as the most destructive president to libertarian values. The most destructive Republican president to libertarian values, bar none in my opinion, is George W. Bush. And the architect behind many of those policies is Dick Cheney. These are the people who call torture enhanced interrogation. These are the people who gave us the preemptive war doctrine, Iraq war. And they lied us into that situation. And for Kamala to say, hey, we're going on this new way forward, we're not looking backwards, we're looking forward, we're turning the page, ignore the fact that I'm the VP, but also, look, Dick Cheney, bringing him back and his daughter, and maybe I'm going to appoint a Republican into that position, into a certain position in our administration. And there's speculation that it might be Liz Cheney as Secretary of State or Secretary of Defense. That's crazy. That is the wrong direction. The one solid thing about Trump in terms of the Republican Party is that he strangled the neocons in the bathtub. And Kamala bringing them back, to me, is a disaster, and it should be disqualifying for a libertarian candidate.
I mean, Trump hired John Bolton, so I'm not sure what you're referring to in that regard. And one of the things I'll also say is that there's speculation. No one knows exactly what Republican Kamala is going to put in her administration. Donald Trump has said he's going to put Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard in his administration, two leftists that you just mentioned. Right. So, I mean, that's not arguable. He's bringing in these people. I mean, Robert F. Kennedy spent his career saying that we should jail climate change deniers, ban guns. They both support the Green New Deal. Robert F. Kennedy spent 10 years running an vaccine misinformation website. I mean, these people are crazy. He wants to put the guy that's saying that the government should take a look at chemical fertilizer in charge of health. Incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Robert F. Kennedy. I know that that's one of the internet's favorite candidates, or Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah.
So I take your point in that regard. But in terms of who is going to be installed into these positions, I think that is also crucial because Donald Trump was president. He has a record. And the people that he installed were skeptics of EPA regulations as the head of the EPA. He's installed and other positions with similar types of skeptics. He did hire John Bolton, but he fired him immediately. And by the way, as a condition of hiring him, he was going to make him shave his mustache, and that would have been hilarious. But considering you're talking about Trump as like the anti-libertarian candidate, there's all these different articles that you can look up from his first term as president that talk about him as the deregulator. Now, Trump, of course, says it's 22-1 regulations removed versus regulations added, but Forbes and Politico seem to have landed around a 10-1 ratio. And Politico actually criticized him because the ones that he added don't have as much impact on the economy as the ones that he took away. To me, this is very libertarian. And in fact, they scored him as adding something like 156 regulations in his first year to Obama's 554 to George W. Bush's 455. So
Let's wait for the questions and
yeah,
answers.
so
please finish, Sean.
if like the economy matters as an issue for libertarians, how can you sign up for a big government regulator over somebody who at least in the people that he appoints seems to want to deregulate in certain regards?
Yeah, that's actually...
Josh, answer, and then we'll start taking questions. So please line up there where you see Casey. He's going to be moderating, or he's going to be taking the questions. We're also going to be taking questions online. We have about 1,500 people watching on Civil, our host platform currently. So thank you to all watching, and please go ahead, finish your point, and then we'll get to the questions.
So there is one of the things I will give Trump credit for was his deregulation. I mean, that was definitely a great thing. But it is a little misleading because people talk about, like, I think the number I see touted is a number that came from his administration. Trump actually added in net over his 4-year term $40 billion in new regulations. So he repealed some, but he also added new ones. So Trump was not actually by any definition a deregulator. He was just a slower regulator than previous presidents. So I mean, that's a great change. But the other thing I'll say related to the economy, I mean, GDP growth, non-COVID, by the way, I wanted, when I came into this debate, look up the numbers and strip out of COVID just to give the guy a fair shake. Non-COVID GDP growth was higher under Biden than Trump. Manufacturing investments, 300% up since Biden took office. Unemployment back down to historic lows. Inflation back down to historic lows after Trump printed half the money in existence and signed his name to checks and sent them to everyone. So, I mean, the economic figures, like related to the Democrats, actually outperformed the Trump administration in many ways.
All right. At this point, thank you both. Let's get to our first question, which will actually come from online from our Civil participants. Casey, if you'd like to read it, I can read it also if you have it.
Go ahead.
All right. For our first question from our viewers from Civil Online is going for Josh. So, question for you, Josh. You blame Trump for January 6th. What evidence do you have that he was a part or that he led January 6th riots? Civil users.
I'm so glad you asked that question. So it is abundantly clear. It wasn't clear a year ago just how involved Trump was in January 6th. It is clear now. So based on what we've seen from Jack Smith with his DOJ indictment and the documents that have come out from that, proved a couple things that are very key to this story. Trump knew that he had the mail-in ballot, or that Biden had the mail-in ballot advantage before the election. His advisors told him that Biden was likely to have a catch-up later in the night. That's something that he was informed of. Trump's team, including Steve Bannon, is on recording saying that Trump was going to declare victory on election night regardless of who won. Trump was also, according to his team and witnesses under oath, personally responsible for putting the fake elector scheme in motion and tracked it daily. It's arguable when you read through the Jack Smith indictment that Trump put more effort into overturning the election than any other of his legislative agendas his legislative proposals during his presidency. I would encourage everyone, it's a long document, to go read through what just came out from the DOJ, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, because it proves in many, many cases, Trump was directly involved in the fake elector scheme, knew it was bullshit. That's why he surrounded himself with private lawyers, because his White House appointed lawyers told him it was bullshit. And he still pursued this case regardless, with the intent of stopping the peaceful transfer of power.
All right. Sean, would you like to comment on the same question?
What was the question?
Trump's
About
involvement in January
Trump's guilty of leading the January 6th riot.
In terms of the riot specifically, I actually think he is less culpable in that because the fake electors plot is actually different from the people who raided the Capitol. He kind of gets blamed for both, which I think is ridiculous. He did tell people to go peacefully, and I believe the first breach of the Capitol, and I could be wrong on this, actually happened during his speech.
No.
No? Okay, I could be wrong on that. But he didn't send them over to go do that, and there is records of him asking for National Guard and the Speaker of the House refusing that. Now, granted, there are reasons for that. A lot of people say she set it up. I think that's a little conspiratorial. It's more about not having troops at the Capitol building like during this process, I think. So I think it's a blunder in that direction. But as far as the riot, I actually think his responsibility is totally overstated.
Yeah, I don't even want to talk about the riot. January 6th, Nancy Pelosi had nothing to do with the National Guard. The National Guard was reporting to Donald Trump. Donald Trump's responsible for deploying the National Guard to D.C. Nancy Pelosi had nothing to do with that, just for clarity.
All right, let's get to the first question from the audience. Please go ahead.
So I'm sorry, but this will be about January 6th. It's actually very, very relevant to what you just said, and I'm wondering if, Josh, if you could speak to the confusion and deliberate distortions that are coming from very low-quality conservative press that are either the people writing this stuff are deliberately lying or very confused, but they highly fragment information to make it appear that certain things are true. Can you just speak to that?
Well, I mean, that's like the entire strategy is to throw out a bunch of lies. This is basically the entire MAGA strategy when it comes to the way that they've been managing this election, is throw out a bunch of lies that are very hard to disprove and cause a bunch of fires, and then you have these fact checkers that have to go back and through. Some of these things stick, like the Pelosi January 6th National Guard thing sticks. I keep hearing that all the time, which is completely untrue. But you know, I think that for those of us that want to combat these narratives, I actually agree with Sean. Like, we don't need to focus on whether he incited a riot or not. You need to look at what he did behind the scenes with the fake elector plot. You need to look at it. I mean, if a Democrat would do this, everyone in this room would be outraged. But for some reason, because he's a Republican, I have libertarians coming to me and saying it's not a big deal. No, I mean, he was personally involved in this plot. He conned fake electors across the country. He introduced this fake elector scheme before a single alternative elector even came forward in any of the swing states. He was personally responsible for it. And so, I mean, I think if you just focus on the elector plot, it's probably the best way to do it because that's the most clear, I think, example that really cuts through the bullshit on this.
Sean, would you like to comment on the same question?
Yeah. Not the question as a whole, but I think the Cheesebro guy, that particular attorney, is the one who came up with this plot.
Eastman, I think, right?
Okay, yeah. Eastman, and isn't it in his book? I have a weird feeling that Donald Trump, the reality game show host, did not come up out of his mind with the fake elector scheme, like on his own. I think that's a bit of an exaggeration, but I'll let the next question come.
All right, to the next question. Please go ahead and make it brief. We have a lot of questions.
Got it. So I just wanted to ask a quick question about, so there was a statement that was made by Josh that that it's the nature of an authoritarian to immediately undermine the election results as soon as it comes out. It's like am I correct? And that's
well,
what
yeah,
said?
it's just throughout history you could see authoritarians attacking the electoral process. It's something that often happens.
Thank you. So if we look back to 2016, we can see that there was massive disinformation about Donald Trump's victory when they stated that it was only done through Russian bots and Russian interference with the election. What do we say to it being a kind of this new trend to immediately, either side, whoever loses, to undermine the election immediately, when it was first the Democrats who undermined the election in 2016? I
mean, Hillary conceded on like election night, so I'm not sure you could equate those two in any way. I mean, there were people online, and there was an investigation into Russian interference in our elections, which, by the way, I mean, I'm not sure if you guys have read the Tenet indictment. Russia is still trying to influence our media and our minds, and they're funneling money into many people in the MAGA movement to do so. So that's still happening. It wasn't to the extent that a lot of the people on the far left might claim it was, but it is happening. But there's no equating this. Like, Donald Trump spent months and invested time to create, as one federal judge calls it, a coup in search of a legal theory out of thin air, and he has not conceded to this day. he has pledged to pardon the 1,000 people that went into the Capitol. He called 2 years ago to terminate all the rules found in the Constitution because of it. Hillary Clinton conceded on election night. So listen, if the Democrats, that's the thing that blows me away by this. Like, by J.D. Vance's and Donald Trump's own argument, Kamala Harris should have the constitutional permission to deny Trump a victory if he wins this year. That's their legal theory.
Sean, would you like to comment?
Yeah. So as far as like I think you're kind of underplaying it, and that's possibly because only 2016 was brought up as an option. But for almost every election since I was 10 years old, if the Democrats lose, they say that it was fraud of some kind. Al Gore famously took this all the way to December. Obviously, Trump took it all the way to January, and still says that he won. So that's a bit worse in that regard. I remember after the John Kerry election, there was a film that was dropped, and this was on like mainstream services, called Hacking Democracy, about how the Republicans were tied in with the voting machines and all the stuff that we heard before about how these are rigged. And then 2008 and 2012, nothing. And then 2016, that's when Trump was saying it before the election. And then afterwards, although Hillary did concede, it was the entire party line for the Democratic Party that he was an illegitimate president. And you also had them trying to rip apart one of our institutions since the founding of the Republic, the Electoral College, over it. So yeah, this does happen on both sides, but I do think Trump not conceding to this day, it's like you're already running, Biden's been president. Like, you're already running for 2024. You could just concede and do the non-consecutive terms.
And I'll add one thing on the Al Gore thing. I mean, that election was incredibly contentious. Guess what Al Gore did on January 6th? He certified his own loss.
Oh, and to your point about they did reform that Electoral Count Act in 2020.
They did.
So technically, Kamala wouldn't have the ability to do
Well,
that
I mean,
under
again,
this theory.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, if you have a candidate like Trump who has blatant disregard for the rules of the Constitution, no one would have thought that he would have come up with the January 6th plot. He's a term limit. What kind of legal theory is he going to come up to try to get around that? I mean, this was literally, there was not a single vice president in the history of the country that said they had the authority to not certify an elector. It was bullshit.
All right, let's get to the third question. Thank you.
Hello. So you continue to, Josh, right? You continue to harp on Donald Trump's oath to the Constitution and his role as the President of the United States, especially for January 6th, despite you not wanting to talk about that. But what about Kamala Harris's oath to defending the California Constitution and her role as a public official? So as Sean brought up, not obeying the Supreme Court of California's rulings, and then also just refusing to prosecute both federal and state crimes, criminals in her state for far longer than Donald Trump.
Yeah, I actually had meant to bring that up in my rebuttal, and I didn't because I forgot. So I'm glad you brought it up. Kamala Harris fought with, was it the California Supreme Court for years, for like 2 years on this. The tug and pull between different branches of government is something that happens. I mean, Donald Trump refused to endorse was a DACA ruling in 2020 from the Supreme Court. Both Donald Trump and Bill Barr both did basically something very similar. They just refused to kind of enact the ruling. So I look at those things as problematic. I don't want to see a presidential candidate that undermines our institutions and refuses to go along. But I don't look at that as a violation of the oath. I mean, if you look at that as a violation of the oath, then Donald Trump's also guilty of as well, because he did the same thing with DACA in 2020. But one thing I will say, because Kamala Harris was a prosecutor, and she worked for law enforcement, and some of the worst cases that I could think about related to Kamala Harris go back to, I think it was her time as Attorney General, when there was a story which really resonated with me where police had created fake information to like get this guy in prison, and then this whole thing happened. Donald Trump wants to give people like Kamala Harris and the police that framed that man universal qualified immunity. Like, I mean, you can't argue that Kamala Harris was a bad prosecutor that helped the police abuse people when your argument is that we should give the police universal qualified immunity for every crime they commit. They can't ever be convicted. That's Donald Trump's plan. It's crazy.
Sean, would you like to comment or take a question?
I could take the. Well, actually, I could comment about the qualified immunity thing. This was invented by the courts out of nothing, and part of the reason why people want to get rid of qualified immunity is because they want you to be able to sue police officers. This is more of a civil thing than a criminal thing. and sue them individually. But normally when something is done wrong to you as a government agent, by a government agent, you sue the government because that's where the money is. It's like slipping and falling in Walmart, and you're going to sue the guy that didn't put up that little triangle sign. It doesn't make a lot of sense. The reason that Kamala Harris and the Democrats want to get rid of qualified immunity is because they're against policing, not because they're in favor of civil liberties. Let's be clear about that.
I mean, I can't imagine a libertarian argument, though, that it should be harder to sue the police when they violate your
Yeah,
your
you can
individual
sue the
rights.
police as an institution right now, no problem.
No,
It
individual
happens all the
police
time.
for violating
But they don't,
rights.
yeah, because you end up in basically making them invalid because you can bog down any officer in frivolous lawsuits. If we had a loser pay system, then I would be like, all right, qualified immunity, and you know what, the cops got to go get insurance. But that's not the system that we have. We reward litigation beyond all end and drowning somebody in legal costs because the process is the punishment in this country.
All right, at this point, I think we have a question from online. We just crossed 1,600 watchers on Civil.
Wow,
People
nice.
We
watching.
do. Really
Thank you.
awesome
Go ahead.
turnout online. We have an online question from Brian Lambrecht asks, question for both debaters. How does Josh expect Trump to successfully end the democratic process? And does Sean believe that this is a realistic threat?
I don't think any constitutional scholar could have predicted what they would have done on January 6th. I mean, again, it was a complete crackpot legal theory that was based on no precedent. I mean, 250 years. We assumed that this was just a given, that we would certify our elections. I think the problem is not that I have some specific proposal in mind. I mean, he could pull a Putin and throw, I don't know, J.D. Vance as president, drop on the VP line, or put his son in. I mean, I don't know what could happen. It's impossible to know the millions of different criminal schemes that he could come up with. The problem is that he's demonstrated a willingness to do it, documented willingness to do it and carry it out. And that's why I think it's disqualifying.
Yeah. So first of all, you have the, I think it's the 23rd Amendment that bars him from running for a third term.
Yeah.
So he's not going to be able to run this crazy elector scheme because he can't get on the ballot in the first place. So I don't think it's a realistic possibility. On top of that, you say there's no precedent for this. That's kind of not true. Like, we have the Hayes election, which resulted in the compromise of 1876, or maybe the compromise was in 1877. And that's the reason why we have the Electoral Count Act, because we do have a process, if the election can't be certified, where you kick it to the Congress, but they vote in terms of state blocks. So yeah, that is like a goofy crackpot legal theory, whatever you want to call it. I agree, very unusual, but there is like some legal basis for this. But the idea that you can't run for a third term, like, that's ironclad in the Constitution. So you have to present a plausible scenario for that. And by the way, getting people to amend the Constitution so he could run would actually be going through the process, so that doesn't count.
Real quick comment on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
The bill that was passed after that was, as you said, the Electoral Count Act, which is the exact law that Trump tried to subvert on January 6th. So that's something. And I also mentioned, you want to put a scenario in place. I don't know how familiar you are with J.D. Vance and his political journey and his political vision for the world. J.D. Vance is what I'd say like a child of this like dark enlightenment, new right movement that came out of Silicon Valley. I mean, you think about influencers like billionaires like Peter Thiel and Curtis Yarvin, who's a big writer for this. And Curtis Yarvin, who J.D. Vance has praised, has called for a humane alternative to genocide and said that Americans need to get over their dictator phobia. We need a dictator. So this is the vice presidential candidate. I could not imagine if Trump leaves office and puts this guy in as president, what kind of schemes he could come up with, barring the constitutional restriction, which I'm sure they could try to come up with some scheme for that as well.
Sean, would you like to comment or take the fourth question?
Yeah, I just got a bad joke, so next question.
All right, please go ahead.
So my question is primarily for Josh. It seems pretty clear that you extend the rule of law onto Donald Trump, right? However, it doesn't seem that you extend this rule of law onto illegal immigration, opposing deportation and enforcing laws regarding that. How do you square that circle?
So I don't oppose deportation. So let me be clear. I mean, I oppose... Actually, let me just zoom out for a second. When I look at the situation that's caused the immigration crisis that we have in this country today, I look at it as a problem of our system. So there are people skirting our laws and going illegally through the border, because going legally, getting legal status, getting a work permit, getting legal protection, being able to pay taxes, is far more expensive than just paying a coyote to sneak you over. So when I look at the situation, I say, we need a candidate who's willing to fix that system and give people a clear path to citizenship. That's the only way we're going to bring these people out of the shadows. It's not going to be done by putting the military in the streets and going door to door. And I personally believe that freedom of movement is a natural right. I think we should be free to move in this world across borders. And so when I look at the situation with like the border crossings, I look at a border crossing as a victimless crime. I mean, this whole narrative that libertarians on the right talk about how they steal welfare is actually just not true. I mean, immigrants pay $1.34 into welfare for every dollar they take. So I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question. That's the way I look at it.
Sean?
Yeah. So like I said with the qualified immunity thing, if we had a loser pay system, it makes sense to get rid of it, make sure the cops get lawsuit insurance, and they have to deal with that. But as Ron Paul once said, you can't have open borders and a welfare system. And we are seeing the consequences of that every day. You talk about overall immigrant stats, don't think I didn't notice that, about how overall immigrants pay $1.34 for every dollar they take out in welfare, but that's because certain immigrants from certain places that mostly come legally or on these special visas, which are legally, by the way, they earn a ton of money. They earn more than the average American. These are the high value immigrant or high income earner immigrants. But right now what we're seeing, and this is by design, Joe Biden said and promised that he wanted these people to surge to the border for the asylum system. These people are coming in and they're claiming asylum. And while under normal circumstances, they shouldn't be eligible for different welfare programs, go check out the Roosevelt Hotel, or I forgot what that island is in between us. It might be Roosevelt Island. They have these migrant shelters here. If you're a New York City taxpayer, like I am, unfortunately, you're paying for this. They're cutting budgets for citizens for these people. So yeah, it's all fine and dandy to vote for somebody like Chase Oliver, who's advocating for an Ellis Island style immigration system, but we don't have the circumstances that we had under Ellis Island. If you claim asylum fraudulently, you're incentivized to do so, there's no more remain in Mexico, then you are guaranteed a certain level of benefits, and you will go to the cities, as we've seen, where you get those benefits. So that's the problem with open borders right now.
Do you support the implementation of like streamlined work permits and the allowing people to come here through different processes other than asylum to fix that problem?
Well, if they're already here in the asylum system, if you defrauded it, I want you to face the consequences of that, because there are legitimate asylum seekers in the system that are being flooded by all these people who are economic migrants. Like, we have a system for economic immigration. It's not great, but that doesn't mean you break the law and just come here anyway and then claim asylum and take up all these benefits.
All right, let's get to our fifth question. Please go ahead.
This is involving you, Josh. How can we expect Kamala Harris to keep our nation out of more foreign wars? Like, for example, Gaza is never ending, and Israel, in fact, has already invaded, like, Lebanon as we speak. And the Ukraine war is still ongoing for, like, 2 years since. How should we expect her, as our expected presidential-elect, to, like, keep us out of more wars, like China or Iran?
So the way that I look at this situation is, I mean, we could look at the outcomes of the Biden-Harris administration. I mean, we did end a war in Afghanistan, a war that Trump never ended. We did radically cut down drone strikes. I think Donald Trump killed 18,000, or committed 18,000 drone strikes to Biden's 500. One of the things that I believe, and this is controversial in libertarian circles, is that helping our allies like Ukraine, especially when they're fighting a war against an authoritarian country that tries to annex them, providing them with help, if it's overseen by Congress, is a way for us to avoid boots on the ground. And for that reason, I think that that approach is it's not a pro-war approach. I think it's more of a pro-peace approach.
Sean, would you like to comment? All right, let's take sixth question. Please go ahead.
Hello. Question for both. Sorry, tall. Question for both. Focusing on the Libertarian to support Kamala over Trump, how would you go forward on the local areas, essentially thinking their support, their backing, their involvement with the greater government for their local government to any one of the local areas? such as with immigration. My local school, they were storing immigrants in my former building, theirs. But for my area, we're more of a community that we are involved. We do help in enough people as it is. Not too far out my community, we have a lot more issues with homelessness, which from some of us going on the federal level, we have all statewide homelessness. In focusing with Kamala as the support, how would you believe this goes forward on our representatives, our districts, our lawmakers, even our mayors and governors with going into fixing our local issues?
You want to take that one, Sean?
Yeah. One of the, so I did suggest voting locally for better candidates for certain issues that are contained by the local government. But unfortunately, immigration is a federal issue. And in fact, if you try to enforce immigration law as a local government, if you think that's a good strategy, then you will face federal persecution for that, which we've seen with Texas, with their barriers and all that. The thing that I fear is, he's talking about how they're going to put forward a pathway to citizenship, and that's going to solve this problem. I think that will incentivize more people. We'll end up with this new underclass, and then we'll have the pressure for a pathway to citizenship all over again. I think that's the result of the Reagan thing. But the thing that I fear is that even the pathway to citizenship isn't even going to happen, because we basically saw Kamala, who was in charge of the border for like the first 3.5 years of the Biden administration, ignore this issue, say that there was no crisis. Oh, they're running out of resources in everybody's communities. That doesn't exist. I'm in Guatemala. I'm talking about root causes. You come see me later about the border. And if they can just ignore that major issue for 3.5 years, suddenly pretend to care about it, and then win election based on that, then that doesn't incentivize them to fix that problem. That incentivizes them to go right back to ignoring it. So I feel like that issue is going to get significantly worse. We're not going to get a pathway to citizenship. He even said Republicans are likely to retain the House of Representatives in this election. So we're just going to end up with more and more people flooding the system. Because make no mistake about it, and I'm sure everybody's savvy enough to know this, the only reason that she's talking about this is because it's a top issue in the election, and Trump polls way better than her on this. For the first time in American history, mass deportations had a majority, not a plurality, support from the general population.
Specifically on immigration.
Quick response, and then we'll take a
Yeah.
couple more questions and call it for the Q&A session. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so actually just lost my train of thought. Specifically on immigration, I don't think it would be in the worst interest of Kamala Harris or the Republican Party or the Democratic Party to take immigration out of the news. I mean, it's like one of the major things that cause the Republican Party to lose their minds every year. But Biden, repatriated 5 million people, which is the most president has repatriated since George W. Bush. Border crossings right now are at a 4-year low. Border crossings over the summer were at the same level that they were in June of 2019. I would look at, actually, one of the things that bothers me as a libertarian who wants to see an open Ellis Island style immigration system is I have seen Kamala move closer to the Republicans' position on this, tightening up asylum rules and tightening up the restrictions. But immigrants are not, it's not a zero-sum game. Like, when immigrants come into the country, they're usually coming here because we have an excess of jobs. I mean, if you look at immigration and map it over the amount of open jobs in a market and in the economy, there's typically a correlation there. I mean, when you look at just the last 4 years. They're coming here to work. Their demand raises the cost of living for everyone else because they're here to consume. They're here to do things. And so, yeah, I mean, I hope the Republican Party and Donald Trump doesn't do what he did last year by trying to shut down an immigration bill or some sort of bipartisan solution. It's possible that he will. Even if he's not president, he might try to shut it down again.
All right, let's take one more question from the audience on civil, and then we'll take a couple more questions, but you'll have to address them in your closing remarks because we're running out of time. Please go
We're
ahead.
at 8:45, so should we just go down the line, maybe?
Yeah,
and
go
they
with
can
the
do-
civil question real quick, and
Okay,
then, yeah.
sounds good. Yeah, so there's a number of questions on civil about the character of Kamala Harris, specifically addressed to Josh. Like, do you really think that she's being a truthful person, that she would be a good president? And two, what do you think about the fact that she skipped the primary system in terms of electorally and was just chosen by the party?
It's impossible to look into somebody's mind. As I said, didn't support Kamala in 2020. I think that the fact that she's not ideologically possessed is probably a good thing because she's going to follow the incentives. So if she moderates and she gets more support from moderating, it's likely going to pull her towards the center. The last thing I want to see is an economic populist, like a far left in the president. I want to see somebody who's much closer to the center than to Bernie Sanders. And I think that she's not ideologically possessed. So I actually think that's a win because we can make sure that the incentives are there to pull her away from economic populism. The whole, democracy with Kamala Harris getting put on the ballot is like a big concern troll, like it's a threat to democracy. I hear this all the time from MAGA. MAGA screamed for years about how senile Joe Biden was. And then Joe Biden, because he's not in a cult, listened to his party and stepped down. And the candidate who got the most votes in the primary took his place, Kamala Harris. Parties are private entities. The last thing I want as a libertarian is the federal government stepping in and telling me how to run my private party. I dealt with this fight in Tennessee for years. I don't want the federal government involved in how these parties choose their candidates. So I don't look at it as anti-democratic, and I think the delegates endorsed her. She got the most votes, and Joe Biden, thankfully, is not in a cult, so he quit, unlike Trump, who is rambling, incoherent, talking about Arnold Palmer's slang at rallies. It's pretty crazy.
Sean, would you like to address?
Yeah, just really quickly. The Cenk Uygur got more votes than Kamala Harris in the primary. She got none. She wasn't on any ballots.
She was the vice presidential candidate.
No, you vote for the president. Biden could have replaced her if he wanted. That would have been perfectly normal because the presidential nominee picks the VP. Now, granted, I know a lot of people were complaining about Biden being senile. Most of them were complaining about that, like RFK Jr., so that they could have a Democratic primary. Kamala told you that he was all aces, top of his game, the best that there was, and one of the reasons why is because she couldn't win a Democratic primary. I mean, the crazy thing about this, because she's raised over $1 billion, is that $30 million in Joe Biden's campaign coffers decided the nominee over 14 million votes in the Democratic primary because she was the only candidate Biden could transfer that money to. Mega party donors basically extorted him. Biden was saying that he's still in the race. Everybody's going to see the comeback, all of that. The man was forced off the ticket. And part of the reason why I'm rooting for Kamala to lose is just to read the book afterwards when these people are all savaging each other, because it was nasty to get him off the ballot. The man's wanted to be president his whole entire life. He's ran 87 times. He lost to George Washington. He is that old. He wanted to be president.
All right, you can address that in the closing statements, but let's get 3 or 4 questions quickly, back to back, and then you hopefully will be able to address those in your closing statements. Please go ahead and brief questions. Go.
So my question is on Section 230. So I know a lot of the candidates and politicians have called for essentially just completely scrapping it, where I would think we're better off essentially reforming it to where you have to choose if you're a platform and a publisher. So I was just curious what your thoughts are on what either candidate would likely do with their party or with different parties on that issue.
All right, next question. Thank you.
My question is, with industry globalization taking its hold in industry, and seeing the failure of Malay in Argentina with isolationist policies, why would a working class single mother teacher vote for anything else other than communism?
All right, let's get to the next one. Thank you.
Okay, in 5 words or less, what is the root of democracy? That's it.
And last 2, if we can, quickly.
Good evening, gentlemen. My question is more about, more for Josh on this one. Why would libertarians, maybe even moderate Democrats or anyone in between, want to vote for someone like Kamala when you have a lot of people who benefit from New York City's taxes, where there's a lot of programs and such, and they're going to illegal immigrants that are coming here, and it's not hurting just in one level. It's the federal, state, and city level, where it's pretty much having everyone want to pick Trump because what they see is that immigrants are coming in, they're skipping the line, and they're getting help. So I guess my question is pretty much, why would you vote?
All right, last question. Thank you.
Thank you. Don't let my size fool you guys. I've been hearing a lot about Russia, but I do want to know from both of you in regards to your perspective on what your candidate can do about China. I lived in South America for a year and a half, and the ongoing influence is kind of alarming. I'm also Hispanic, and I'm seeing that very much in Mexico, where I just came back from living from, where they're negotiating deals in terms of debating whether they should start trading with the Chinese yen. No, that's Japan, or I could be wrong. Thank you. Thank you. So, yeah, just what is your candidate's perspective on that and how they would help in terms of that growing influence?
Perfect. All right. Thank you. So at this point, we would like to ask Sean for his closing statements. You have 5 minutes. Just remember, for the last couple of questions, Section 230, isolationism, somehow communism made its way back to this debate as well, and then immigrants and how to deal with China. So if you'd like, you can come and take the podium for the closing statement. 5 minutes.
Okay. Oh, you want me to take this one? All right, I'll take this one. All right. I think pretty much I've made a solid case for not voting for Kamala Harris. I do want to address some of the questions that were asked. If I could borrow that paper so I could remember all of them, I'd really appreciate it. So Section 230 Section 230 I actually think is pretty valuable. It's the thing that prevents these platforms from being able to be sued based on claims that third-party users make. And yes, Trump has spoken out against Section 230 and about regulating social media companies, mostly in screaming in tweet form about them, but he took no action in that direction. As president, he threw an executive order that was ineffectual in like the waning days. Kamala Harris doesn't believe that Twitter should be able to have different terms of service than Facebook. So the idea that one is pure on this topic and the other isn't, to me, is ridiculous. Like, they're both not great. Again, maybe a reason to vote for a libertarian candidate. Handwriting, Jesus. For Argentina, I don't even know that one. I'm sorry, guys. So as far as why a single mother shouldn't vote for a teacher, I'm sorry, a single mother teacher shouldn't vote for a communist. That's obvious. Don't vote for a communist. It's not going to improve your life. It's never worked. It's not going to work next time. It's not going to get better. In terms of China, we have one party that seems to be aligning closely with China more so than the other. Trump has strong rhetoric against China. I'm not somebody who's really into intervention. Unless it's absolutely necessary. But the fact of the matter is the Chinese gaining influence is at the expense of the American people. They are trying to gain influence to push us out of certain areas so that they can have, instead of one superpower, a dual superpower world. And I don't want to live under those times. That's what the Cold War was all about. So I actually think that Trump being China skeptic, and his tariffs are not the most libertarian thing. But remember, they were promised to bring inflation during his term. But what ended up happening was the manufacturing ended up moving to Vietnam and other countries in the surrounding areas, so the American consumer didn't pay all that much more, and we ended up weakening China, which was the objective. Now, Trump is crazy. He thinks tariffs save the economy. I understand that, but the national security people around him had him use that power for national security. So yeah, I know I missed one of these questions, but I don't remember exactly which one. No, you got it. Oh, okay. As for Argentina, I don't think Milei has failed, by the way. The inflation has reduced dramatically under his term, especially compared to what he had. But in conclusion, Kamala Harris, again, if you were to craft a libertarian candidate out of the mud, breathe life into her, it would still be an anti-libertarian candidate. It would still be more libertarian than Kamala Harris. If she was trying to knock it out of the park on how to piss off every libertarian, then I don't think anybody could have done a better job. She's basically the Barry Bonds on steroids, 73 home run year candidate for the antithesis of a libertarian. In terms of immigration, again, the libertarian position is more open to immigration. But the fact of the matter is, the reason that we are in the problems that we have is because we have a welfare state. And like I said, as Ron Paul said, you can't have open immigration and a welfare state. Trump at least understands that. He wants to get rid of the people that are committing asylum fraud. He talked about them going door to door. Again, there's thousands of them in the shelter. That's like one door. And in fact, most of them are in tents. So I don't even know how you would knock on a door like that. Pretty easy, pretty simple solution right there. And yeah, so Chase Oliver, great platform. I would definitely recommend voting for him, especially if you're in a non-swing state. It definitely helps the Libertarian Party. But if you want to vote for Donald Trump, I think you have a more solid Libertarian case. Again, unless your primary issue is the events of January 6th and all of that nonsense, which, by the way, was like the one Republican riot, not to mention all the riots that happened under the Democrats. And by the way, Kamala Harris, even though the Biden-Harris administration is prosecuting the hell out of the January 6th riots, some cases deservingly so, they seem to have forgotten about all those Black Lives Matter rioters that destroyed, major cities in this country, attacked federal courthouses. We don't see them being chased to the ends of the earth like people who wandered through the Capitol, not to excuse anybody who committed violence or destroyed any property. So yeah, Kamala Harris, the worst candidate for Libertarians. You couldn't do a better job. Bernie Sanders might be better. And again, the guy's a socialist, self-admitted, but at least he's good on civil liberties. Kamala isn't.
Okay, addressing some of the questions first. Yeah, I'm going to bounce around because I didn't write these in order. Yeah, Milei has not failed. I mean, he's done pretty good at cleaning up Argentina. He's also got a lot of disagreement with Trump, but I won't get into that because I have a limited amount of time. Section 230 is not to be understated. Section 230 is the rule that shields social media companies from liability for content posted on their platform. It has been described as the one regulation that built the internet. Tearing down Section 230 would be destructive. I mean, Elon Musk would be sued into oblivion. Okay, if you're a fan of Elon Musk, Section 230 is the reason why he can even run his platform with his own moderation rules. Okay, so and Kamala has not called to repeal Section 230. Both Trump and Hillary Clinton have, for what that's worth. Globalization has definitely not failed. Globalization has led to the greatest cost of living increase, the reduction of poverty, the destruction of child mortality. Economic liberalization that's happened over the last 100 years has been the greatest boon to humanity that we've ever seen in our history. And Donald Trump as a candidate wants to isolate us from the world, not only from a foreign policy perspective, but by throwing up 20% tariffs and by dropping imports. He is going to not only cost American consumers significant amounts of money, $3.9 trillion, somebody of that degree. He's also going to destroy jobs in the United States because exports will decline due to retaliatory tariffs. And he's going to raise taxes on every single person in this room, unless you're making like over $1 million a year. The root of democracy, I think, is the consent of the governed. I don't know if that's a good answer, but I look at that as kind of the thing that birthed democracies. And then on China, yeah, I mean, China's a really difficult one. Actually, the whole tariffs thing, I get the argument for some strategic tariffs. I was reading the other day that Donald Trump wants to put a blanket tariff on China, which would include Taiwan if China gets involved in Taiwan in any way, which seems very destructive. I'm not sure if everyone's aware of the dynamic in Taiwan. I mean, the most advanced semiconductors in the world are produced in Taiwan. It's called their Silicon Shield. It's basically like their nuclear weapons program, because if you invade Taiwan, Taiwan will stop selling you semiconductors, which are required in the most advanced machinery and technology. So I do think we need to have a strategic approach. I think Kamala's looked at that. I mean, I think actually, with the exception, there's elements of this bill I don't support, but the CHIPS Act that Harris and Biden passed did result in manufacturing investment locally to build semiconductors in the United States. And that has been, extremely driven the manufacturing investment in the United States in the semiconductor space. I think that's a good strategic approach to reduce our reliance on China. But I will close by saying this: in no way is Donald Trump a pro-civil liberties candidate. We didn't get to have enough time to get into the nuance here, but there are so many examples related to the specific call to bring the Alien and Sedition Acts back, which is, you need to look at this law. These laws allow the president to detain and arrest American citizens without trial. If Donald Trump wanted just to go after immigrants, if all he wanted to do was go after immigrants, he has broad power to go after undocumented immigrants. He does not need the Alien and Sedition Acts. There's a reason why he brought that up. When you look at his involvement on January 6th, read Jack Smith's indictment. he was personally involved in trying to stop the peaceful transfer of power, and I cannot devise what scheme he will try to come up with again. And I know that J.D. Vance has said clearly that he sees no problem with this and he would have overturned it. And I'll close with this since I'm running out of time. In my entire lifetime, the Libertarians have looked at the Republican Party as our greatest ally. The Republican Party has failed to do that in many ways. That's part of the reason why I'm not a Republican anymore. But I don't expect the Democrats to be the vanguard of libertarianism and small government. What I do expect is the Republican Party to live up to that value. As long as we have a man who wants to spend more, who wants to restrict trade more, who wants to grow the federal government more, who wants to violate your civil liberties more in the Republican Party, we are not going to have an ally there. And so what we need to do is we need to get him out of the way. And this year, that means voting for Kamala, kick him out of the Republican Party, and then let's rebuild a movement around libertarianism on the right. So thank you.
All right, everyone, at this point, please whip out your phones one more time and vote. Vote for the post-debate tally to see which one of the two debaters was successful in swaying more people to their side. So please go ahead and do that now. And as we do that, let me once more thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it. This is our second debate. We plan to have many more, hopefully one or at least maybe even two a month. And the topics will, again, pertain to young folks, the issues that interest them. And please, do not plan on leaving. There's an open bar, and the debaters will stick around. We'll have a little bit of a party situation. So if you're here, if you have some time, please stick around, have a drink with us. And I would also like to thank, we have 2,600 people watching us online through Civil. So thank you for those watching at home. We really appreciate it. Thank you for participating in this debate. And at this point, let me get a quick view. Okay, some people are still voting. Casey, would we like to make any statements for Young Voices in the future? Any other events we would like to talk about?
Yeah, sure. Just as Heckmat said, we'll hopefully be announcing one more debate before the end of the year, TBD. We'll email you, keep you posted on that. I will say we do have a happy hour coming up on November 19th with the groups, the State Policy Network in America's Future. It will be at McHale's Bar and Grill in Midtown. So if you check out joinyv.org, you'll see more details about that. And yeah, hopefully many more debates to come. And have I filibustered long enough?
Yes, you have. Yes, you have.
Great. It's time for the results.
Let's have a little bit of a drum roll, everyone, please. All right, so for the pre-debate tally, the agree vote was 13.95%. The disagree vote was much higher at 70%. The undecided was at 16.30%. The post-debate, we have 8.9% for the agree side. So it's a decline of about 5% for Josh. And for the disagree side, for whether we should vote for Kamala Harris as Libertarians, rose to 91.1%. So that is a change of 20%. Congratulations, Sean, on a well-earned win. Congratulations, both of you, for an excellent debate. And thank you one last time for everyone here and online.